Good noontime to you. Can't say morning, can't say afternoon because it's straight up noon. Good noon to you. Good day. Welcome to the fourth and final installment for the Lunch and Learn for this month of April, as we've been looking at the Pema Chodron classic, When Things Fall Apart. I'm really very, very happy that we did this month, if for no other reason than for me to go back and review this book. I think this is a keeper. And the great thing about Lunch and Learn is that we give ourselves just a small break within our week to come and gather and reflect and study on something. Maybe the disadvantage is that this book deserves its own lengthy, long 8-week class. That's how valuable it is. That's how in-depth it is. And the things that are offered, the practices, even the practical applications, are things that deserve our sacred pausing. Sacred pausing, so that we can look at these things. This is one of those books that you might read, but you really need to go back and then slow down and actually do what it is that she's suggesting. So hopefully you will keep this in your library. I have a feeling that we might return to this in the future to do some more extensive work. As we always do, we're going to start, though, by grounding ourselves with an affirmative prayer. So if you'll join me and just take a deep breath, pause for a moment, and allow that which is gratitude to be the forefront of your thought and mind. Gratitude for life, gratitude for the freedoms that we have that sometimes we take for granted, gratitude for the ability to come to sacred space with like-minded individuals, gratitude for every single thing that is surrounding us, that is giving us the opportunity to not only look and see and observe the handiwork of that which is intelligence, but to give us the opportunity to practice these principles, and knowing that everything is a representation of divine order, even when we can't see it. So we allow ourselves that space, that understanding, that compassion, that ability to pause and to breathe, and to take things in, and to be more mindful, to live in the now, and to celebrate and know that life in and of itself is a canvas on which we get to create. And so for all of this, for this divine idea which we call Spiritual Living Center of Atlanta, and for all those who are joining us out there in their own worldly experience, we simply say welcome. Joining together, we say, and so it is. Today we're going to jump to chapter 16 in the book. The title of this chapter is called Servants of Peace. You're starting to get a glimpse of Pema Chodron's journey, and the fact that after she left what we would call civilian life, she went and began to study Buddhism quite extensively. One of her main teachers was Trungpa Rinpoche, and she talks a lot about what she was able to glean from his tutelage, his masterful teaching. So Servants of Peace starts with the idea and letting us know what a bodhisattva is. So you have a worksheet, and it actually gives you the opportunity to fill in the blank. So what is a bodhisattva? What does that word mean? Hint, hint, page 97. Mark.
Well, I always thought it was somebody who came to relieve suffering.
Someone who came to relieve suffering. Okay, that's one way to word it. In the book, she said it's those who commit themselves to a path of compassion. So a bodhisattva is someone who is pure in their intent of living a life that is compassion-driven. So she said that as she was studying this, there was a word called paramita, which means going to the other shore. Paramitas are also called transcendent actions. So transcendent actions, coupled with being a bodhisattva, means that as we embark in living this life of being compassionate and kind, that requires us to go to the other shore, to go to that which is beyond convenient, to go and create for ourselves transcendent actions that require us to be more of a responder rather than a reactor. And so in this chapter, she said there are 6 paramitas. One is generosity. The next one is discipline. The next one is patience. The next one is exertion, meditation, and then one that we will close with called pranya. So generosity, we understand generosity as being a transcendent action. But to really transcend the action of generosity is not to give so much something that is surplus, but to actually give something that is something that you need. That's a transcendent action, in order to give of self at such a deep, committed level that you're giving away whatever it is that you have. There's a phrase that says, sometimes those with the least are the ones who give the most. And I may have, I don't know if it was in this particular venue or another class, but I was sharing that a friend of mine who has this family work for her, they employ them and they love them, that when she revealed to this family that it was her husband's birthday, that the wife, who was a young mother, burdened with 2 children, who doesn't drive, walked down Buford Highway to buy him a birthday cake. And the fact that when the husband came home and received this birthday cake and knew what this woman had gone to in order to give this to him, burst into tears. And he was not an emotional person at all, but it just showed the kindness. That's an example of a transcendent action. That's an example of one of these topics then of generosity, is how do you and I give away something that perhaps even we need? So what's the fine line with that? By fine line, I mean, where does that become something that has been labeled codependent? And where is that doing that from this Buddhist perspective of being a bodhisattva, in understanding that whatever it is that we give away will come back to us in some form? That there is this level of impermanence. So you see what I mean? So this is the tricky part about language and about programs and about advancement, is that when we start getting into territory where we're looking at codependency, someone could say that then Mother Teresa was the biggest codependent that ever lived, but I don't think she really minds so much, right? So what is actually codependent when it's an impairment of self? And where is a transcendent action of generosity something that is masterful? Do you follow what I'm saying? So that's what a paramita is calling us to look at, is something that's transcendent. So codependency means what? That we're doing for others to avoid the work, or to avoid the self-reflection, or to avoid the attention that needs to be required towards self. What this transcendent action of generosity is understanding that there will always be more than enough, so I have the faith, the courage, the knowing that whatever it is that I give away will come back to me. We had a practitioner class a couple of weeks ago, and each practitioner was required to stand up and give their own eulogy. And I was very impressed by Lexa's eulogy, because she actually pretended that she was speaking on Lexa's behalf, and she ended up giving away things that people, so she actually gave away earrings to another woman, Suzanne, in the class, because Suzanne had said, "Oh, I love your earrings." So Lexa just had taken the earrings, boxed them up, and said, "Lexa wanted you to have these earrings because you had made the comment of that." Have you ever been in someone's presence where they go, "Oh, I love what that is," and they go, "Here, take it"? That's kind of that generosity that we're talking about. That we don't, the shirt off your back. That's right. Next one, discipline. We understand that the paramita of discipline is really about understanding, being open-minded, about looking at things and beginning to dissolve something as bad or good, dissolving labels. So the discipline of looking beyond the label. And would you say that we have a propensity to label things? To immediately go good or bad, right or wrong? So the discipline of this particular paramita, or being a servant of peace, is to always stop ourselves from that labeling and just be with whatever it is that we see. The next one, patience, I think that goes without saying. She says that it's the antidote to anger. It's a way to learn to love and care for whatever we meet on the path. So the opposite of patience then is aggression, that desire to jump, to move, to push against those things that are seemingly attacking us. And so when we can look at those things with patience, that gives us the ability to practice what we talked about last week, which was Tonglen, for extra credit in here or out there. Does anybody remember what the definition of Tonglen was? Breathing in pain. So when you think about a circle 8 figure, you look at that which is painful out in the world, that reaction of, ooh, I don't want to have anything to do with that, or oh, that's uncomfortable. And then rather than deflecting, we actually breathe that situation into us and bring it into that heart space, which then transmutes it into an act of love. So when we see aggression, this idea of patience might say, let me breathe Tonglen into that, so that I'm actually bringing that person into my heart. I'm bringing that conflict into my heart. I'm bringing that aggression into my heart so that I can diffuse it. Again, understanding that this isn't about being a doormat. This isn't about self-infliction. This is about being, as this chapter said, a servant of peace. And when we begin to work with that, exertion being another one. What does she mean by exertion? Exertion is acting, giving, working our way into these bigger perspectives. In order, it's putting action into the words. So to exert from this Buddhist perspective is actually going out and doing Tonglen. It's the practical application. It's not just sitting and meditating with our eyes closed, even though meditating is one of them, but it's actually then whatever meditation and insight it's bringing to me, let me go exert myself and put myself in situations where I get to practice that. And the last of the sixth was called pranya. Pranya, then, is that which turns all action into gold. It is said that the other 5 paramitas that we just talked about could give us reference points, but pranya cuts through the whole thing. Pranya makes us homeless. We have no place to dwell on anything. Because of this, we can finally relax. No more fighting, no more biting, no more taking sides. In other words, it's that delicious ambiguity of just being in the now. She said that her teacher, when they were all signing up to be a bodhisattva, that they would have sort of bodhisattva boot camp. And so he had all of these things, all these practices that we've just talked about, and he would say, this is the way that we do it. And just as they got used to the way that they would do it, he would go, this is not going to be the way that we do it. And then he would change the rules. And they got to practice with the irritation of that. They got to practice with the upset of that, or the rug being pulled out from under them, because we start to see how we become inclined to get comfortable, and then we don't want anything to change. But change is inevitable. And then when he would change it up and they would get used to that, he would change it again. And he would keep changing it again, and he would keep changing it again. And what that ended up doing was making all of these paramitas, or these transcendent actions, much more meaningful. Do you see? Transcendent action, to transcend something, means that regardless then of the trend or the tides of change, that we are never thrown off of our practice, because the practice in and of itself is a transcendent practice. That means we can be in the midst of anything and be in that space of being a bodhisattva. Not just when it's convenient, or not just when the cameras are on, or not any of those types of things, but allowing ourselves to be totally 100% committed to that. Any thoughts or ideas from chapter 16? I did want to point out this notable quote, which is on page 99 of this edition. She said, "When we are training in the art of peace, we are not given any promises that because of our noble intentions, everything will be okay." How does that make you feel? Remembering that this is this Buddhist perspective, right? This Buddhist perspective of the middle path. That just because we have these, we are in training, just because we are committing ourselves to be a servant of peace, or to offer the art of peace, that there's no promise that what you're doing is going to produce a particular result. So that in and of itself is a transcendent action. If you knew that your kindness would not be reciprocated, would you be kind? Isn't that a good question? If you knew that all of the work that you had put into a particular project, at the end of that project would either not be appreciated, or the project in and of itself would not be green lighted, would you still do the work anyway? Do you see what she's getting at? That this whole spiritual path, if there's this sort of low-lying insidious thing that the reason why I'm doing this is because I want this. And if you could tell the future, and if you could go forward and that particular thing didn't happen, would you be on the spiritual path anyway? That to me is one of the most profound questions, from this Buddhist perspective, that transcendence of, would I be doing this, or am I only doing it because I want a specific payoff? Well, what's really the payoff, if you're going to use that term?
The joy and your happiness.
The joy and the happiness of what?
Of the act of being kind to someone, that you feel it inside.
And that joy and kindness might have to be cultivated, because again, we might equate present day that joy and kindness is determinable by what we get back. If you smile at me, or if you're kind, then I will feel joy. Can I feel joy and be kind even when it's not being returned? That's really the key. Someone else had an answer. Cool. Lexa, did you have a...
But as metaphysicians, we know by definition it's going to be okay.
Right.
So the difference there is wanting an outcome versus we know all is well. And if we learn to detach from the form and what comes up, then all is okay as we go.
So yes.
As well as whatever comes of it, right?
So as a metaphysician, Karen was saying that what we ultimately know, and again, knowing is cultivated. Who do you know? Do you know that it's going to be okay? So we get to, I would like to say we get to integrate these two ideas, because I don't actually think that they're that different. Because I think ultimately the knowing is what they're aspiring to, is that transcension consciousness that isn't dependent upon the permanence of anything earthly. That they're practicing this art, this compassion, this peace, that isn't dependent upon anything in the physical world reflecting that back. So they're okay, they're knowing that things okay, is actually an internal mindful path, right? And it's the same with, I would say, those of us who study mental science principles, that we understand that there is only one reality. You can take that reality and you could call it God, or you could call it intelligence. So regardless of what I do, and if it's not reciprocated, ultimately what is being reciprocated is in alignment with the way that I think. So the goal isn't so much what to get, but how do I continue to purify my thought in such a way that I am interdependent with all that is. Not dependent upon the physical, but I'm interdependent with that which already exists.
That just brings to mind that I think all whistleblowers have to ask themselves that question when they go through that amazing internal process where they know that they're going to speak out against some kind of injustice or abuse or whatever, that they know that they're going to speak out the truth and they know that it's not going to be kindly received, and yet they don't want to do it because their soul is selfish enough.
That's an interesting thing to think about, being a whistleblower. The whistleblower says the truth even when it's not popular or when they know that by doing that, that there will be physical repercussions.
Part of the email and the vision also is a question that you do always get back.
Right. The knowing that there is this law of reciprocity, that we do get it back. What do we actually get back? Because sometimes it might be tangible things. Sometimes what we might get back is a deep clarity.
Would you ever, I would say that we always get back what we get, it's just might not be, I'm getting back the kindness that I gave to you, that I am getting from within. So I guess when you're saying they're not tied to the reciprocity, but aren't they kind of, because they just know a greater truth that I'm not gonna expect it back from you? Or am I missing?
No, this could be the whole hour looking at this. So what is reciprocity? Do we think that reciprocity means that by giving in human form on the human plane, that what I get back will be in human form on the human plane? And maybe the Buddhists are looking more at their belief in karma, that by being good in this particular lifetime, it may not show up in this lifetime, but as the soul progresses, it will come in some form or fashion. So there's a great deal of patience there, right? And who's to say which is better than, right, wrong? It just is. So whatever path of belief that we resonate to, we get to examine that. But ultimately what we want to do is find a way to be in that bodhisattva space, that space of compassion. Chapter 17 was on opinions, and it's really a meditation exercise. And so the notable quote on there was, "There is no one on the planet, neither of those whom we see as the oppressed, nor those whom we see as the oppressor, who doesn't have what it takes to wake up." So there isn't anyone on the planet who doesn't have the ability to wake up. Wake up to what? To Folgers coffee. No, wake up to what? To truth, okay? And again, what is truth? But to wake up to the oneness, wake up to that which tells us that the only true energy, the only thing that is real is love. That everyone has the capacity to do that, if indeed we all are one. So there are varying degrees of consciousness or livingness or understanding to that, but everyone is a part of that. No one is exempt or excommunicated out of that ability. So in this chapter then on opinions, she's just simply saying when you meditate, you might want to try meditating and going, oh, that's an opinion. And then the next thought that comes through, go, oh, that's an opinion. Oh, okay, that's an opinion. It's the same thing as in a meditation class. I said that you could also too, as we look at monkey mind, stop trying to train the monkey mind or think that you're supposed to train it, but just go thinking, 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 thinking. And that in and of itself becomes a mindful act. So she's offering the same kind of thing, that you're looking at the opinions that are floating through your mind, and that's all that they are, opinions. And as she says, nothing more, nothing less. They're just opinions. What's the benefit of that, do you think? That particular meditative exercise?
No judgment.
So it starts to diminish judgment. It allows us to, again, take off the label of good opinion or right opinion or bad opinion, but just to know that everything is opinion, that even we are walking around with a bunch of opinions that are groomed and fostered and controlled and collected by ourselves. It doesn't mean that they're right or wrong.
Because it provides insights. So all this type of learning provides insights as to either I'm tipping over and or I have an aversion to something or I'm clinging to something. Those are Buddhist terms
Mm-hmm.
in the practice itself. But when I'm thinking about around science of mind, it also teaches me, am I going to choose from secondary cause or am I going to have a fresh choice? And so that's how the insights help me into this watching my mind, because it piggybacks if I'm choosing from second cause or am I choosing from fresh cause.
So as we watch our mind, as we watch our opinions, Penelope was using science of mind language that secondary cause means that when I examine my opinion and I make a choice based on what I've always chosen, then that's a repetitive choice. That's what we call secondary cause. When I make a fresh choice, when I examine my opinion and I go, that might be true, it might not be true, but what would a bodhisattva do? Not what would David do just automatically, but what would a bodhisattva do? What would somebody who is free of those labels choose? That's a fresh choice then, because that might force me to do something that I'm not comfortable with. The chapter 18, secret oral instructions. Again, all of these dovetail. So she opens up, and this is on page 113. She opens up with a story. Where is that? About an 11th century Indian yogi by the name of Naropa. And one day this yogi meets an old hag on the street. And she apparently knew that he was one of the greatest Buddhist scholars in India, and asked him if he understood the words in the large book that he was holding. He said he did. And so she laughed and danced with glee. Then she asked him if he understood the meaning of the teachings of his book. Thinking to please her even more, he again said yes. And at that point she became enraged, yelling at him that he was a hypocrite and a liar. That encounter changed his life. He knew that she had his number. Truthfully, he only understood the words and not the profound inner meaning of all the teachings that he could expound upon so beautifully. In other words, she was showing him that if she danced with glee, that he was smart and good, but if she became outraged and yelled at him, that he really didn't understand basically the teachings of the books that he was holding, because his popularity was dependent on whether or not he could get her to dance with glee again. And so she was teaching him that there are varying degrees of reactions that we are going to meet up into the world every single day, perhaps every half hour. There will be a glee moment in that half hour, and there will be a raging moment in that half hour. And so when Naropa, seeking the meaning behind the words, set out to find a teacher, he continuously found himself in this position of what he called being squeezed. So this chapter is about what it means to be squeezed. She says we continually find ourselves in that squeeze. It's a place where we look for alternatives to just being there. So when you're squeezed, what does that mean? Go ahead and talk about that physically. What does that do for you when you're squeezed?
Feels good sometimes.
Feels good. So only Ellen would like that. All right. So when we're in a very tight position, it's typically what? You're in an elevator and it's jammed packed with people. You're what? You're constricted, and what do you want to happen? You want the door to open and you want everybody to get out. So you're literally counting the minutes. So then where is your thought process in that moment? Is it in the elevator? Or is it in the future of, I can't wait to get out of here? So nothing then in that moment is being taken in. I have to laugh because that actually happened to me. I was in a show in New York. And everybody bonded and everybody loved one another, and the show was closing, and they go, "Oh my God, we'll be friends forever." And we went to a cast party and no one wanted to end, and so somebody had the brilliant idea that the party would continue at her apartment, and off we went in 3 taxi cabs filled with people, and all of these people tried to cram into her apartment in the apartment building. And between floors, the elevator stopped. And suddenly, all of this, "Oh my God, best friends forever, I love you," started to turn very quickly in that confined, squeezed space. And somebody said, "Do this," and somebody said, "Do that," and the other person said, "I'm doing that and it's not working," and somebody said, "Take the tile out of the ceiling, I can't crawl up there," and everybody started to turn in this squeezed thing. And I remember being in the very back, pressed up against the wall, and there was a girl from the cast, and we were face to face, and she said, "I'm going to be sick." And she's like right here. And I didn't know I was so enlightened back then. This was long before Science of Mind, but I just said, "Okay." And I said, "Take her mind off of it." So I started to talk about her earrings, and I started to talk about the show, and wasn't that a great this, and just to try to engage her so that she wasn't so focused on the squeeze, but to be in that moment. And we were there probably a good half an hour, and lots happened in that half an hour. You just saw a lot of ugly in that half an hour. And then the fire people came, and we all had to be pulled out of the top, and they with the little pull ladder and the ropes and whatnot. And wouldn't you know, when everybody got out, they were, "Okay, where's our apartment?" And they were ready to go to the party. And I was like, "No, I don't think so." But that made me think of this, because we continually find ourselves in that squeeze, and it's a place where we look for alternatives to just being there. At the bottom of 115, it says, "This place of the squeeze is the very point in our meditation and in our lives where we can really learn something. The point where we are not able to take it or to leave it, where we are caught between a rock and a hard place, caught with both the upliftedness of our ideas and the rawness of what's happening in front of our eyes. This is indeed a very fruitful place." And so when we feel squeezed, there's a tendency for mind to become so small. We feel miserable, like a victim, pathetic. And again, what's the first thing that we want to do in that moment? To leave it, to find a way to remove ourselves from the squeeze. So again, this whole chapter is, how do you stay in the squeeze? How do you stay in the squeeze? Have any of you ever stayed in the squeeze and breathed through it and afterwards went, "Thank God that I did that"? Who has an example? Charmin?
I experienced her example of being in a sweat lodge before and not being close to the door where I could escape.
Right.
And having to just breathe through it.
Yeah, she said that she used to do a lot of sweat lodges in the 60s in Santa Fe, and the only way she would do it is if she got to sit right by the flap, the door, so that when it became so unbearable, sissy, I'm going to tell her you said that, that she had that alternative. Now, knowing that she had the alternative kept her in the sweat lodge. But she said, "I wonder what it would have been like if I had been on the opposite side of the circle, away from the door. What more I would have learned in that experience," right? So are we always looking for the comfort? Are we always looking for the convenient? Are we always looking for the thing that's going to alleviate the squeeze? Again, let's take label off, judgment right or wrong. what's behind that? This is where it becomes fascinating. What's the belief behind the fact that we do that? That somehow we're in control or we're able to manage outcomes. And what happens when we then find that we're not able to manage an outcome? Right? So then there's a huge dismantling or identity crisis, whereas when we practice these things that she's speaking about, we wouldn't be so fluctuating all the time, that there would be much more of an even keel. Mark?
Something showed up as you asked me as far as if we're always trying to run from those things,
Mm-hmm.
but if we can have the discipline to come back that it's all turning out for our own good, it allows me to take action or to just be with it. And I'm feeling that there's going to be more fear letting go in my world having it this way.
Okay.
That makes sense?
Well, yeah, she's really talking what she called the state of nowness. And so, do you really want to go explore the state of nowness? Maybe we don't. And that's not good or bad. But in this elevated state of consciousness, in this particular path, if being mindful is something that is of great benefit to us, then we get to see that that particular path, that path of mindfulness, is a big, vast path that allows us to really transcend, if that's a word that you're attracted to transcend all of that which is blockage, all of that which is small, all of that which is confined or somehow an inhibitor that makes us want to control things. Because mindfulness will deliver us from all of the day-to-day prison-inducing experiences that are there. But it's really a matter of, do we want to go down that path? Do we want to really practice the state of nowness? So I was speaking to one of my, I mentor new ministers, and this minister said, "You'd be so proud of me because I'm practicing non-attachment," because that was a big thing for him. And I said, "Cool." I said, "Really?" And I said, and he was giving me some examples, and I said, my favorite line in A Course in Miracles is, love brings up everything unlike itself. I said, because when you look at that statement, it says that if I'm going to call myself a loving person, then everything unlike love is going to come up in order to give me the ability to practice what it is that I'm saying that I'm wanting. And I said, so you're telling me that you're making a proclamation to be this person who is non-attached. And I said, I'm just going to let you know to just be an observant, to be mindful of all the things that you're going to want to be attached to as you make this wonderful declaration. And he goes, oh, shit. I said, I want you to keep doing it. And I said, but there's a lot more than just making a proclamation that you want to practice being, non-attached. Because by doing that, then everything we're attached to will show up. So it's the same thing with nowness. It's the same thing with mindfulness. It's the same thing with all of these methods that she's so brilliantly outlining for us. Everything unlike that is going to come up, isn't it? And sometimes then that's the squeeze. And if we don't stick with the squeeze, we don't really realize that what we're doing is we drew that forth in order to help us move beyond just a repetitive pattern. So I want to be able to hang out in the squeeze. It's the same thing as I told you the story of speaking at that Baptist university and them screaming heretic at me. And I didn't know her terminology, but I guess I could say that I stood there, I stood in the squeeze and let it happen, only to discover that I didn't die after that experience, that I learned a lot. So the state of nowness. The other thing that I loved that she said was, when she was a child, she had a picture book, and it was called Lives of the Saints. And she said, she goes, there was nothing about that book that had any benefit to me, because the way they were portrayed is they never spit, burped, farted, or hurt a fly. She goes, I got much more out of a book called The Life of Milarepa, which was about somebody who had murdered somebody and was trying to find reconciliation and would get a little far and then would fall down again. And she goes, I identified much more with that particular story, right? And so we get to look at the way in which we deify people and how we think that maybe their path of mindfulness is so much better. And already by then we have done what? We've judged ourselves. So the notable quote from this chapter, the next time there's no ground to stand on, don't consider it an obstacle, consider it a remarkable stroke of luck. So how are you with having the rug pulled out from under you?
Some days better than others.
Yeah.
But just my question about this, David, is, do you have any suggestions? So how do we hang in there during those times and just say, I'm in the squeeze and I'm in the squeeze? I mean, is that the thing to do, to practice that?
Neil, I don't think there's a manual of how to do it, because your squeeze or your experience might have variables to somebody else's, but you'll know when you're uncomfortable. And so if you could say, this is an experiment for me, this is a life experiment, kind of go back to what Karen said, what I ultimately know is that everything's going to be okay. So I've got that. So now in this moment, what can I do to not run away from this? What can I do that's different than the way I've reacted in the past? How might I be able to just breathe deeply and just observe? See, I think to say, how can I just be here and observe? I don't have to change anything. I don't have to come up with a smart answer. I can say, I don't know. But how can I just be with it rather than avoiding? Right? So rather than just not addressing it at all. Thoughts on that? Storm? Well, how is this enlightenment going? Yeah. Do you understand this whole Buddhist tradition and what their aim is? And when you really look at these terms that she offers and what they're saying, you know, that looking for that neutrality and not judging things as good nor bad, not running away from things, that middle path. What is your overall perspective about that? So life then is a moment-by-moment practice that requires you to stay in the now. Do you feel that that kind of approach is sacrificial in any way, that it takes away from you? So do you think that you could implement Buddhist practices in Western civilization and still be a part of the world? Okay, theoretically, yes, actually, no. So when you say actually, perhaps not, what does that mean exactly? Where do you see it as being incongruent? Do you think that the practice is of benefit? Okay. So I love, there is a Buddhist business practice. And the Buddhist business practice is if I want something, if I want a particular success in business, then what I get to do is go and help someone else achieve that success. And what does that do mindfully then for me by doing that for another person? What's the lesson in that? They have to let go of, well, okay, they get to let go of the outcome. What was that?
No, I would say if they don't do it, maybe they would see how things go, and then they'll exit it so that wherever it is.
Okay. So they can see kind of what that looks like. Doesn't it also say that there's more than enough? So rather than being competitive, that I want this particular thing, so I need to strategize and outdo other people, that by going and helping someone else succeed, that I'm already proving the principle that there's space for everyone to succeed, right? What would that be like in your particular line of profession to do that? You don't have to announce it. You don't have to go, oh, look what I'm doing. I'm helping so-and-so succeed. But that you find ways to support somebody in getting to a place that you want yourself. What would you learn by that? Equanimity? Generosity? And that's, in that earlier chapter, generosity was one of those pivotal things. And true generosity is giving something away that you actually want.
And also, gives you patience.
Patience. Yeah.
Well, it's living from your heart instead of your ego.
So if living from your heart was really the aim rather than living from what's in it for me, then I think that we would end up having more than one could ever need. But it's just a complete, think about it, it almost makes our brains hurt because we're not living in a world that really practices that. We live in a very competitive world. Even if we don't think we're competitive, we're still competitive because we're thinking that we need to get these things. And some of that has to do with survival. Some of that has to do with fear. But when you what if you set out every single day, my intention is to help someone achieve something that I would like to have myself? What if that was just a summer project that you decided to take on? This summer, I'm going to help someone achieve something that I would like to have myself. I wonder what you would be like at the end of the summer. That level of mentoring, that level of time and attention. And not to get anything, and to notice how the ego would want to say, well, look at you. You're such a saint. Oh my God. What a lovely person. You have to go, no, that's not why I'm doing it. I'm doing it just because that's the way that life affords me the ability to do that. So that again works with all of this Buddhist path and terminology. Chapter 19, 3 methods for working with chaos. Any of you working with chaos right now? All right. Not so much working as fighting. So the first traditional method is called no more struggle. And she says on page 120, the first method, no more struggle, is epitomized by a particular instruction. And that's when we sit down to meditate. Whatever arises in our minds, we look at it directly. Look at that. And she goes, thinking, thinking, thinking. And go back to the simplicity and the immediacy of the breath. Again and again, we return to pristine awareness free from concepts. I think one of the best ways that you could do this is in driving. Because how many of you drive, you turn on the key, and you get to your destination, and you have no idea what happened in between? Because our minds are just all over the place. So one of the ways that we could do this no more struggle is by simply looking at everything around us and actually speak it out. Oh, look, I'm behind a car with a Florida license plate. Oh, look, On the bottom of that Florida license plate, it says the Sunshine State. Oh, look, I'm thinking about the sun. Oh, look, I'm noticing this. And you're just naming things as you see them. And so you're naming what it is that you're thinking. And as you do that, you go, I wonder how long I might be able to sustain this practice. So if I'm driving for 15 minutes, you would be practicing being mindful for 15 minutes. And there's no struggle with that, because you don't have to look beyond or create anything. You're just articulating what is.
That's a great practice in Atlanta right now, to not get upset over sitting in your car for an hour and a half. That would have normally taken you 20 minutes.
So you would have no more struggle in your commutes in Atlanta,
Well, I don't, because I laugh.
because you laugh through it. All right. Do we believe her? Okay.
But I like that approach as well.
The second method of working with chaos is using poison as medicine. Do you know what she's talking about again? Because we've already talked about that. That's Tonglen. Using poison as medicine, meaning I look at those things that are poisonous in the world, and I do what with them? I breathe them in. I use it as internal medicine in order to bring it into my heart and to transmit it or transfuse it with compassion. So again, this is so much about being mindful. It's not about dismissing or running away from situations that are difficult, but breathing those situations in and allowing them to be a part of us, to use that and to turn that poison into medicine. To take difficult situations, she says, to awaken our genuine caring for other people who, just like us, often find themselves in pain. And the third method for working with chaos is to regard whatever arises as the manifestation of awakened energy. So in other words, when we look at all of those things around us, we go, look at that chaos. What do we know about chaos from a scientific perspective?
Organizing into divine will.
It's a reorganization. It's necessary in order for the next evolution of what is to be to come. So if we're trying to suppress chaos, then we're actually trying to suppress the next evolution of what is wanting to come.
Flatline is not life.
Flat line is not life, right? So she told this interesting thing in Tibet. It's called the Shernal grounds, and those are the graveyards in Tibet. And the Shernal grounds are where there are body parts, and she goes, I'm sure it doesn't smell very good, and the vultures are there eating up, and there are all kinds of things around there, and the vultures and everything are just sitting there waiting for the bodies to arrive. So perhaps the closest thing to a Shernal ground in our world is not a graveyard, but a hospital emergency room, or something where chaos is so prevalent, and that we would just try to avoid that at all cost. What would happen if we allowed ourselves to be in the midst of that and began to breathe and to do this work, realizing that chaos in and of itself is channeling yet another degree of life? So you might not do it to that extreme, but where are you trying to suppress chaos? Or where are you labeling chaos and making it a bad thing? Oh, I don't know. Maybe like government? Where do we see that even though on the surface it just looks like just total ridiculousness? But essentially what it's providing us the ability to do is to look beyond that. So she says we get to let the storylines go. We get to slow down enough to just be present. We look and reconcile the judgments, the schemes, the struggling. All of these things provide for us the practice that actually we are calling forth. You ever considered the fact that you called forth chaos? Why in the world would we do that? Why do you think we call forth? And what does it mean to call forth chaos? The part of us that's calling forth is that soul part of us, right? Because we said we wanted what? Something greater, some kind of evolution. The inherent part of us knows that chaos is fertile ground. In the Buddhist tradition, it knows that all of those things are fertile ground for our evolution. And last but not least, where does the time go? Chapter 20, the trick of choicelessness. My computer wanted to keep changing that word. The trick of choicelessness. So on page 128, she said that in the Buddhist tradition, there is a thing called a Samaya Bond. And a Samaya Bond is where a student finds a teacher. And if it works out and they create a Samaya Bond, then it means that the teacher will never leave the student, no matter what the student does, and that the student will never leave the teacher, no matter what the teacher does. And they paint this picture that this is like one of the biggest things that you could do, that in your quest for enlightenment that you would find this. And then she said, and it's a complete and total trick. Because Samaya is a trick because we think we have a choice about whether or not to make this commitment to sanity. But the fact is, it's been choiceless all along. Do you see the paradox? So the thing is, you think, oh, I'm going to go on this quest and I'm going to find this teacher, or as a teacher, I'm going to have this recruit, this student. But in actuality, we're already doing that because you're already in relationship with people anyway. We think that we can determine whether or not we're going to be with those people, but we have to remain in the energy and relationship of those people anyway. Do you see what she's getting at? Some of you look very confused. She's saying we will be in those relationships anyway. We will be a part of that anyway, because as tribal people, as relational beings, you can't separate yourself from that kind of committed thing unless, what? We were a complete hermit and isolated ourselves away, and which we know how that probably would end. So in conclusion, she says we have to stop thinking that we can get away and settle down somewhere else. How many of you are holding that idea? In the future, I'm going to go away, I'm going to settle down, I'm going to get away from everything. Are you really? Are you really going to get away from everything? We're just rearranging the furniture, technically, aren't we, in the game of life? We think that we could just relax with exhaustion and all the other things. The most important samayas are the samaya of body, speech, and mind. So in other words, we look at our relationship, our devoted relationship, a relationship that will never leave us, with our physical body, the relationship with our mind, which will always be creating and producing thought, and the relationship with our voice. Those are the three relationships that we will have, that will always be there. So, in conclusion, thank you so much again for Lunch and Learn. May I ask that you go back and you review this work over and over again. If you have been joining us, thank you again. And I want to give you yet one more opportunity to prove that by sharing this, that you get benefit. And if you get benefit, then you might want to be able to donate to us through PayPal, or to use our text to tithe giving, which is at 404-796-7030. That's 404-796-7030. That gives you an opportunity to fill out your information along with a credit card information, and then you can just put in any amount and just send that to us, and that we automatically get that. We thank you for taking the time to do that. Thank you for giving yourselves the luxury of pausing in the midst of all of your activity and joining us. And July, we'll do another one. All right? Thank you so much.